Are you ready to learn how to use ArcGIS? At this point, you probably installed the software that we need for this course called ArcGIS. Most likely you're installing version 10.3. To get to the software, you would go to your Start menu, All Programs, ArcGIS, and under ArcGIS, you're going to see that you have a variety of Arc products. The one that we're going to be using for 95% of the course is called ArcMap. Mine is version 10.2. Yours may be different. Either way, it doesn't really matter. You click on that to get started. You can also create a desktop shortcut should you wish to do that, and I actually suggest that you do indeed do that. So when ArcGIS opens, you get the Getting Started dialog box that comes up, and you have the option of creating a new map or of browsing for one that already exists. I'm going to create a new map, so I'm going to hit OK. And what's going to open here is a blank ArcMap document. Now, if we would go to save our ArcMap document, the file extension for all ArcMap projects is .mxd, and that's going to become important when we start creating maps and sharing data. There are some nuances to ArcGIS that might be different than other programs that you are used to using. What I would like to do to begin learning about ArcGIS is to show you the interface so that you understand the various components, and then we'll learn how to manipulate data within ArcMap. So obviously the first thing we have to do anything is to add data to our map, and we do that by using our Add Data button here. If we click on that, we can add GIS data that exists on our hard drive. I have a folder called GIS data where I have a number of different data layers stored. So I'm going to add a couple of different data layers. I'm going to add Lebanon County townships, road center lines, and bridges. And now this looks a little bit messy because the bridges are of a statewide data layer while the other two aren't. So I'm going to simply click on my road center lines and zoom to layer, so it zooms me into Lebanon County. Now notice the different geometries associated with each of these different data layers. Pennsylvania bridges are a point, road center lines are a line, and Lebanon townships are a polygon. So in GIS, we have what's known as features, and they can be points, lines, or polygons. In the table of contents, it will list the points up top, the lines below, and the polygons at the bottom. And the reason for that is because if we had the bridges at the bottom, they would be covered up by the polygon. So oftentimes, if you're not seeing your data for some reason, your data layers just might have got rearranged. You can just pull your data up to the top to be able to see it. Additionally, you have the option of turning data layers on and off as you need them or don't need them. So in case I don't want to look at the bridges, I just want to look at the road center lines and the townships, I can just simply turn that off. And I don't necessarily have to remove it from the project to turn that data layer off. If you do want to remove a particular data layer from your table of contents, you just right-click on it and hit remove, and then it removes it from your list. This area, the table of contents, is something that oftentimes, if you accidentally X out, you may not know how to get it back. The way you can get your table of contents back is by going to Windows, Table of Contents, and it puts it back where it was. And that's a common problem initially because sometimes you're tempted just to clean up your map area and you might get rid of that. It's actually not necessarily a bad idea when we get into map design to do that, because it gives you a bigger canvas from which to work. So that's your table of contents area and where all your data layers will reside. Now, in terms of your data layers, let's discuss these a little bit more. As mentioned in the previous video, all data layers have an attribute table associated with it. So if I right click on Lebanon Townships and go to Open Attribute Table, I can see all the attributes associated with this particular data layer. And we can see that we have, just a few different data layers available to us. This is something that becomes really important because, as mentioned before, it's this data on which you can make maps. And we can add data to this. Maybe perhaps you have your own data that you would like to add for each of the townships in Lebanon County. We will learn how to add different fields and then how to edit the data values in there, and also how to do other database operations such as joins and relates to give your data a little bit more on the attribute end. But again, to access a layer's attribute table, we would right click on it and go to Open Attribute Table, and you'll see all the attributes associated with it. Before I move on from this, I'm going to add another data layer that's very similar to the Lebanon Townships, but this one's going to have a little bit more data layers associated with it. If I open up this one, when I scroll over, I can see that it has a number of different demographic factors included in this table. So things like median, household income, population, ethnicity, and so forth. So there's some really good tricks in the table that you can use if you're just trying to get some really quick stats on the particular townships. Maybe, for instance, you want to know, well, which township in Lebanon County has the highest population. You could sort ascending or descending so that you can see it puts them in a numerical order so that you are able to see that very quickly. And we can see the one that has the highest population is the city of Lebanon, and then northern Lebanon, South Lebanon, and so forth. So it's really a quick way to get information about the features that you see on the map is just by doing that sorting, ascending, and descending. And again, just to remind you about the importance of attribute tables are important because that's the stuff that we make maps based upon, the data that's in there, and that's the information that we use to do querying, basically asking our map questions. So the more attributes that we have available, the better. And again, we can add to that ourselves by using various techniques. Now, not only do each of these different data layers have a database associated with it, you can customize the way that each of these looks on our map. And I'm actually going to remove the initial townships. But let's say, for instance, I want my townships to be a different color. I can just simply click on the symbol, and the symbol selector comes up, which allows me to change what's called the symbology. You can change the fill color, the outline color, and the outline width. I'm going to use a light gray for the fill. I'm going to keep the outline width and color the same and simply hit OK. So it's really easy to make little changes like that. If we single click on it, like I said, the symbol selector comes up where we can select symbols and change a lot of the different properties of that particular symbol. If we just want to do something as basic as changing color, we would then just have to right click on it and the color palette comes up for us to change the symbol. So I decided, oh, maybe I want maybe just a different shade of gray, I could do that. So same with road center lines. By default, ArcMap just picks the color when it adds it to the map. Maybe I want something a little bit different. So I'm going to select a darker gray for that and hit OK. So it's very easy to change basic visual elements of your data layers over in your table of contents. If you want to start manipulating your data a little bit more in terms of the symbology, what we have to do is go to our layer properties box. And a lot of the work that you're going to be doing in ArcMap, it has to do with the various layer properties. The layer properties sets how your data layer looks, how it's labeled, how it's positioned. There's all sorts of things that it affects. So if we double click on our data layer, our layer properties dialog box will open. In here, we have a number of different tabs. The ones that are probably the most important and the ones that you'll be spending the most time in are your General tab, your Source tab, your Symbology tab, and your Labels tab. Not to say that you won't use the others, but those are always the big ones. And let's start with the General tab. The General tab is where we can change the layer name. Notice that this is called enriched_Lebanon_townships. And while I might know what that means, doesn't mean everybody else knows what that means. So this is a file name. File names need to be changed to plain English. Basically, what is it in actuality? And this is Lebanon County Townships. Or we might even be able to just get away with calling it townships, but for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to call it Lebanon County Townships. And when I hit apply, notice that that takes effect over in my table of contents. The way that your data looks in your table of contents is how it will translate to the map that you're making after you go through all of these changes. So you want to make it something that makes some sense to the map user. As you're designing your maps, there are two things that you really need to be keeping in mind. You have to keep in mind your map's purpose, why are you making this, and your map audience. And I think audience is always even a bigger importance than the purpose. You have to make sure that what you're giving to your audience is understandable. And again, while you might know all the file names, if somebody coming from the outside looks at it and they'll be like, what the heck is this? That's why it's important to change it to, you know, actual proper English for your maps. So that's the General tab. The Source tab, this is very helpful because this will tell you your data source. And I'm going to back up a second here before I get to this. If we would go to save this project, this ArcMap project, go to File, Save As, you'll note that it's saving it as an ArcMap document. And I'm just going to call this LT for Lebanon Township and hit Save. The file extension for an ArcMap project is .mxd. That's indicative of a project. Now, this data that we added here was added from a file location somewhere on your computer. And if I right-click on my Lebanon County Townships and goes back to my layer properties, this is telling me where my data resides and what it's called. When I hit that Save button to save my MXD, it's actually saving that file path into the project. So if I would say email this MXD to a colleague, I would also have to send all the data that comprises the map, or else the MXD is not going to open. So if you start seeing red exclamation points over here, it means it doesn't know where your data is. And you can go here to check, you know, the data source where it was initially added from, and then you can reconnect it. But this is, again, just telling me where my data is stored. And then it also tells me the coordinate system of my data and the units of my data. So that's something that's important. If you forget where the heck you added this data from, or if you have broken data links over here, this tells you where you originally added it from, and you might have moved it on your computer. The next one that's important is symbology, and we're really going to get into this in the next video. This is how we change the way that our data looks based on certain fields in the attribute table. Right now, we have Lebanon County Township symbolized as single symbol, meaning that everything looks the same regardless of what it is. And that's common when we have like a base map like this. Sometimes there's no reason for each township to be a different color, especially when you're putting data on top of it. But there might be a good reason to symbolize the data. If we, the two main types of maps that we're going to be learning to make in the next video are are a graduated color map and a unique value map. A unique value map is one that's based on categories or text data, descriptive data, and graduated color maps are based on quantitative data. So it's either a number or text that you're making the map based on. So for Lebanon County townships, I'm going to select quantities here, and if you remember, we had that population field. We could just make a quick population map, and I'm going to get rid of all those zeros, make this a little bit easier to read. Excuse me. And then if I hit apply, very quickly I have a map of Lebanon County showing population in the various townships. So we can see where population is clustered and where it's not. One of the things that makes this map difficult for somebody that's not from Lebanon County, makes it difficult to interpret, is the fact that the townships aren't labeled. I'm not from Lebanon County, so labels would definitely help me understand which ones are which. So to label our data, we can do this in two different ways. Probably the easiest way to label your data is by right-clicking on the data layer and going to Label Features. But something it's being a little slow. But notice when the label add, it kind of does something wacky. It's just labeling Lebanon, and Harrisburg, which doesn't make much sense. If we open up our attribute table, what it's doing is picking the FIPS name to label, and it's labeling that field. So the way that we can change the field that it labels upon is by going back to our layer properties, selecting our Labels tab, and changing the label field to municipality 1, because that's the one that had the name in. And if we hit apply, we can now see that all our townships are labeled. And in this layer properties box, we can do a lot of other things with labels. We can change the color, whether they're bold, italicized, the size, the font, all those fun things. You can make those customizations should you wish. So I might want to change the color of these, or maybe I'm just going to bold them and hit apply, and it makes them just a little bit more apparent on the map. So labeling is quite an easy function to do. The other way you can label that I showed you how to right click and go to Label Features and then go into Layer Properties. The other way that you can do it is just by going straight to Layer Properties and checking this box here, selecting your field that you're labeling upon and hitting Apply. So two different ways of getting to it. You can also turn labels on and off very quickly after they're first added, just by going to Label Features. You just turn them off, turn them on. So really nice and simple. And I encourage you to think very carefully about what to label and what not to label. Oh, you don't want your map to become too clustered or cluttered with labels, but at the same time, you want your map to be one that's understandable to your audience. Later in the course, we're going to learn some fun labeling techniques that help avoid things like overlap and clutteredness, and just give you some more options in terms of where these labels are placed. So that's another thing that can be done within your table of contents. So now let's look at the most common toolbar that you're going to be using in ArcGIS. It will be what's called your Tools toolbar. And I'm going to pull mine off of my undock it off of my interface so that you can see it a little bit more clearly. You see that it has a lot of zoom in and zoom out tools, and it also has tools that help us work with the features that we see on our map. Oftentimes you might accidentally or purposely close this out and you're like, how the heck do I get this back? There are two ways to get your toolbar back. One is to go to an empty gray area on your interface somewhere, just right here for instance, right click, and you'll get a list of all the toolbars that are within ArcGIS. And we just go down and select tools. The other way that we can do the same thing is by going to customize toolbars and then tools. And we can also dock it or undock it based on our preferences. And after you start using ArcGIS a little bit for designing maps and doing analysis, I think everybody has the way that they like their interface to be set up. For instance, one of the toolbars that I normally keep on all the time is my draw toolbar, as you see that it's up here, but oftentimes I drag it down at the bottom to have that down there, so as I'm designing maps I can quickly change some of the properties of my titles and legends and so forth by using this particular toolbar. So that's something that you over time you'll learn to build that your toolbars and docking them where it works for you best. So let's go over these tools and how to use them. And this is what I encourage you to do first in getting to learn ArcGIS. While it's really exciting to go and start making maps, mastering the tools is really helpful because it alleviates frustration later. So we have our zoom tools. This tool, the zoom in, it's best to use, as it says, by clicking once or dragging a box on the map. I'm not a fan of the click once. I do the drag a box because you can get a lot more precise by doing that. So say, for instance, we want to zoom into South Anvil Township. We go up in the upper left corner, drag with our mouse down to the lower right, and it zooms it in on South Anvil Township. If it's not exactly the zoom that we want, or it didn't get the whole township, we can then use our pan tool to just pan or pull the map down so that the whole township is seen in our map display. So this tool is again best used by just drawing a box around the particular thing that you want to zoom in on, and then the pan tool can be used you just drag the map around. And this is great because like a lot of times you just want to kind of compare things, or like if you're looking at an aerial photo, this allows you to kind of just look at that aerial and pan around the whole map. So the hand tool or pan tool is good for that. This tool is the opposite of the first one. You drag a box to zoom out on something. So if I want to zoom out on the city of Lebanon, I just draw a box around it and it starts zooming me out on it. So you can see how far you can take that. This tool zooms to the full extent of your map, or your map. Now this means that the data layers that are in here, it zooms to the furthest extent of the data layer there. So if I hit that, it's going to zoom to Lebanon County, because both data layers are of just Lebanon County. Now if I go and add these bridges again that we were looking at earlier, and if I go to zoom extent, it's going to zoom me to this extent of Pennsylvania, because the Pennsylvania bridges are of a statewide extent, and that's the biggest extent on in the map, so that would then go to that full extent. So just to kind of let you know what that does. Another cool thing that having to do with zooming that is really a helpful thing to know is that not only can you zoom by using these tools, you can, if you want to zoom to one particular layer, like the extent of a layer, you can right click on that layer and go to zoom to layer, and it pops it back into that spatial extent. Other zoom tools that are available are the zoom fixed zoom in and fixed zoom out. So if I use this tool, this will zoom me in on the center of the map. So if I just slowly do it, it's just going in on the center, and likewise this is zooming out on the center. What I tend to do with those tools is, like let's say I'm zooming into Cornwall and I want to get in just a little further. I use that tool to get in a little further and then pan to do the fine-tune adjustment. These two buttons, go back, previous extent, and go to next, are great to have in case you get a little bit click happy. If I want to go back to what I just had, I can I can do that or go forward, and it goes forward or back as much as 5 extents. And oftentimes what might happen is that you might accidentally bump your mouse while you're in a zoom and you want to get back to the previous one. You just can hit that button to get back to that previous extent. So those things are very helpful. So from this tool to this tool, these are all about map navigation and how to navigate the data that you have on your map. And I would encourage a lot of practice with those, because the better you get with those, the less frustration you'll have in moving around ArcMap. Now, the remainder of the tools are more about learning information about the features that you see on the map. And again, I'm going to zoom out to the extent of my townships. This tool here is called the Select Features tool. This allows us to select features on the map, and then we can look at their attributes in the table, or we can do other processing on them. For instance, if I would use this tool to click on, say, Bethel Township, I could select it, and then I would have the option of exporting that outline of Bethel Township as its own data set. So to show you how this works, I'm going to click on it, and then I'm just going to click on a township. So notice that Swatera Township is selected here. And if we go to our attribute table, we're going to also see that it's selected in the database. So again, remember that correlation between what's selected in the map is also selected in the database, and vice versa. And down here you can see how many are selected. You can isolate the ones that are selected so you don't see the others, or you can opt to see all of them. So that's how you can, look at, some of your data. This tool, though, is best used for comparison purposes of the data that's in the table. So let's say I want to know out of East Hanover, Union, Swatera, Bethel, and Cold Springs Township, I want to know which one of those has the most population, and I want to know their median income. If I select those and open up the attribute table, you notice that they're, again, all selected. I can opt to just show those. And then if I want to see which one has the highest median income, I can sort that. And we see that this one at the bottom, which is Union Township, has the highest median income. If we sort by total population, and I did descending that time instead of ascending, we can see that Bethel Township has the highest population out of those 5 townships. So this tool is great for comparison purposes. And you notice when I was selecting these, I clicked on them to select them, but I was holding down my shift key so that I could make multiple selections. If I want to deselect one that I have selected, I can just keep holding that shift key and click on it to deselect it. If I want to deselect them all, which you do want to do after you're done getting your answer, always deselect, because if you run any processes later, it's only going to run on those features that are selected, which will then obviously mess up your analysis that you're doing. So to clear it, click an empty white space, or another way of clearing it is by clicking this button here, clear selected features. You can also select data by just drawing a box, and that box will touch anything that you want to select. So I know I want Cold Spring, East Hanover, Union, Swatera, and Bethel. So I just draw a box that touches each one of them, and then they are selected. So multiple ways of doing that. And one last way, why not? The other way we can do things is we can go to the attribute table, and we can select the ones that we want. So we want Cold Spring. I'm going to hold down my control key to select non-adjacent rows, and which were the other ones, Union. And I'm clicking this little gray thing right there, East Hanover. And it would probably make my life easier if I would just put these in alphabetical order. So we have East Hanover, Bethel, and Swatera. And again, notice how once they are selected in the table, they're also selected on the corresponding maps. So many different ways of achieving the same result. And that's one of the lovely things that you're going to find about ArcMap. There's a lot of redundant ways of doing things. Just like in Microsoft Word and other products, there's more than one way to do something. It's the same in ArcGIS. So that's your Select Features tool. Another tool that I want to mention is this one, the Select Elements tool. So let's say that you're zooming about, like you decide, hey, I'm going to zoom into Anvil, and you're done with your zooming, you got your map the way that you want. It is a very good idea to get off that zoom tool, because if you accidentally bump your mouse, your map is going to change and it's going to be a frustrating thing. So I call this a Select Elements tool. I call it the safety tool, because when you click on it and click, you're not going to break anything. It's just basically a neutral thing that you can click about your map without any concern. You'll find that this tool will be useful when we learn how to change our labels to annotation. This is how we're going to be able to click on the annotation to move it around to where we want it. But for our purposes now, it's a great tool just to get you back to safety so that you're not using any tool that you don't want to be using. The Identify tool allows us to identify various features on the map. Maybe you just want to know the stats about Jackson Township. We can click on Jackson Township, and what will come up here is the Identify box, and these are all the attributes of Jackson Township from the attribute table here, but it's just making a list of them. So if we wanted to know just the median income of Jackson Township, we can just click on it and find that field, and we have our answer. Likewise, maybe we want to know Cornwalls, we can click on that and we can see what that one is. So this tool, the Identify tool, is the best tool to use when you want to find out information about one or two features that you might see on the map. It just helps you understand what is what. Another important tool on here is your Measure tool. This allows you to measure an area or measure a distance. We're going to do distance first. Let's say that we just want to measure how far across Cold Springs Township is. So we click at the one end, drag over to the other end, and you notice how you see that little box? That's actually the line grabbing the measure tool so that it snaps to it so that you have a more accurate measurement. And if you double click, you will get your measurement, and that's just a little over 10 miles. If miles is not the unit of measure that you want it, you can go to this area here and change your distance units to whatever it might be your preference. Maybe you want it in kilometers. You have that ability to change that back and forth as needed, and you can do this with both distance units and area units. So that's how to use the measure. Well, one last thing with the measure tool. You don't have to just measure from point A to point B. Let's say that you want to measure from here down to here and just kind of around. You single click everywhere the line bends, and then when you're done with what you want to measure, you double click it, and it will give you the measurement up there. So you don't have to do just straight lines. You can do multiple line segments for your measurement. So the other tool that's available is the Measure an Area, and this allows us to draw a polygon to measure things like acreages, square mileage, and so forth. And this is actually not activated in this because that happens to be, with my data, it has a geographic coordinate system. Because it has that geographic coordinate system, that tool is not available. And I'll show you at a later time how to use that measure tool. So that's a little bit about the measure toolbar. And then last, the one I want talked about last is the XY tool. This allows you to enter geographic coordinates in and get a position on the map. And I'm going to cheat a little bit and write down a couple of numbers so that I know what to input that will actually land in Lebanon County. So I'm going to put in for my longitude of -76.367, and my latitude of 40.351. If I do that, those are my coordinates. I can do a couple different things. I can just add a point at that location. I can add a labeled point, which would put the point plus the latitude longitude coordinates. I can add a call out. I could just have the screen flash where that location is, or I can zoom to it or pan to. So lots of options. I'm first just going to put a point where it is, and then I'm going to zoom to it, so I zoom in, and so that you can get a little closer. That's a common thing that a lot of people want to do, is just put a particular point at a geographic location. This is the tool to use for that. In an upcoming video, I will show you how to convert that to a data layer so that that shows up over here in your table of contents, and you can use that as actual data. Notice that the units for this that I'm using is decimal degrees. If your coordinates aren't in decimal degrees, you can change your units here to the format of your choice. So like if I wanted degrees, minutes, seconds, I just change it to that. But again, mine were in decimal degrees, so I just chose to use that value. So that's a bit about the tools toolbar, and again, it's something to get familiar with. What you can take away from this particular video is how to change the way that your data looks in your table of contents, how to access layer properties, how to open up the attribute table so that you can see what data is available to you, and then how to navigate a map using your toolbar. The next video will focus on symbology and basic map design.